So happy to see you all. Happy to see you all. Wonderful, wonderful. Have you been talking about anything already? Have you had a topic already? Mary or Lou?
No topic, Venerable Robina. Everyone's been pondering their own questions. And
well, ask me some questions then. Come on. Ask me some questions. That's a good start. Ask questions. Victor, come on, ask me your question.
I don't have any question right now.
Don't worry, darling, anybody. Just get the ball rolling. Somebody ask something. Huh?
Okay, I'll get the ball rolling.
Good, Mary. Go on, darling.
Well, I kind of feel like it's kind of mundane, but I keep thinking about it because somebody mentioned it was karma. But I got bit by my sister's dog about a month ago, and it's a pretty bad infection right now. And so is that a karmic with the dog?
Okay. 2 seconds. Hang on. Well done, my kid. Thank you so much. Very kind. Thank you. Well, Mary, you must know the answer. I mean, if we take the broadest view possible, the law of you're sort of asking that you discovered a weed in your garden and you wonder if it came from a seed. That's what you're asking, Mary, isn't it? Everything is, I mean, you've got the biggest picture possible, the biggest way to think about it, to get used to it, to frame karma, is that every millisecond, everything arises in your mind. Why has it come? From past habit. Every millisecond of everything you experience out there and the sentient beings, how they treat you and see you, is from past karma. Every millisecond of the way the physical environment impacts upon you. We are the creators of our world. As Lama Zopa says, everything we experience is our own karmic appearance. So if even walking down the street and you hear two people fighting, that's, you've got the karma to see aggression. If you walk down the street and you see people smiling, you've got the karma to see smiling people. And we're not used to this because we're so used to believing the world appears to us like this, that we're just this innocent victim sort of plonked into this planet, and kind of we're very nervous and worried because good things and bad things happen, and we just call it bad luck and good luck. That's the superstitious view of ego. So to get used to this other view, it's simple enough, but it's pretty hard because we feel separate from everything. How dare that dog bite me? How dare that person do this? I mean, this is just the way ego is. The nature of ego is it's an innocent victim that has nothing to do with what happens. That's the feeling we have. It's very primordial, So of course it's karma. I mean, karma means the law of cause and effect. Whatever we experience is a fruit of something, one of the seeds we have planted. I mean, it's such a simple concept, but so fundamentally different from the way we think, we just can't hear it, We just can't hear it. So the answer is yes. What do you think? Otherwise, what? But also, this is the point too, Mary. Listen, the other thing is to remember that if you that when bad things happen, it's the ripening of some negativity, but it often is a really good sign of purification. The dirt is coming out. We've got to interpret it that way. I mean, as Lama Zopa said one time, I always tell that story of this one monk doing years and years of retreat, and at some point was going out of his brain with rage and everything bad happening. The dirt has to come out. Rinpoche said the dirt has to come out, so it can be a good sign. In the same way that we know, if you're digging your garden, and if I don't know what you're trying to do, and I look at your garden, it's like a complete mess. But it's good because you're pulling out all the weeds. So you've got to know how to interpret our experiences. Don't just go, oh, it's a bad thing. Every time any bad thing happens, it's the finishing of it anyway. So that already is good, but usually we get mad at it, so we create more negativity. You understand? So it's the finishing of that karma. So we should be delighted every time something bad happens. And that's logical. Every time a weed pops up, you're so happy now you can pull it out, That's the attitude that really is important, but it's hard to have that. Because the instinct we have is we only want the lovely things, isn't it? We only want the nice things. We're junkies for the nice things. And that's why the world's so difficult to put up with. The world is so hard, And that's what I wanted to talk about, is like just recently, one of my friends, a woman I know in New York, she wrote, and she works with kids in schools. And of course, it's devastating for children right now. It's just horrifying for poor little children trying to interpret these outrageous actions that happen. And she said, there's so much suffering and despair, but she said, all I can try and do is stay optimistic and stay positive, you know? And I think this is an incredibly powerful point for all of us, because we do get overwhelmed by the world. The world is shocking, and we hear all the news instantly, and we only hear bad news. So it is overwhelming. It's really overwhelming, you know? So we just got to, I mean, the thing is, it's the attitude of a bodhisattva, if we try to cultivate it, is that, you know, we're trying to help others. And so if we start freaking out as well, if some kids at school freak out, and then we start to freak out as well, we all drown together. So if we can stay optimistic and kind and positive and loving, then that gives other people courage. It's a very powerful response. It's a very powerful attitude to have, because there's also good things happening. But the trouble is we never see it, you know? This is the thing that I think is really interesting. This is dependent arising, because ego somehow, it's ironic, ego always notices the bad things and runs like a magnet to the bad things, you know, and bad things are happening. There's no doubt about that. But there's so many good things happening, but they get overwhelmed by the bad, and we just don't notice the good. And that's, you know, even the school shooting, if you think about that, at that time, there must have been incredible people with incredible heroics doing good things, but we don't think about that. You know, we only think of the bad things. So we can have courage, like this woman who wrote, all I can do is stay positive. And then when the kids are all freaking out and they say that they see that she's steady, that gives them some courage. We have to have that feeling of responsibility to each other. It's not easy because we're freaking out as well. It's giving courage to others, because the world is a nightmarish place. Bad things do happen. So of course, if you're a Buddhist, you have the view of karma and it explains it. But so often, you know, I mean, no one has any explanation. That's why we suffer so terribly, I think, on our planet. Because, you know, okay, if you're a Christian, you might have a viewpoint. If you're a Muslim, you'll have a viewpoint. If you're a materialist, philosophical view of, you know, of materialism, there's no real explanation of why bad things continue to happen. So we just freak out, you know. So of course, the Buddhist view has its own explanation, and that's very much up to us which philosophical view we take to interpret the world. And often the way we interpret the world is the way to be staying optimistic and positive, and know that, yes, there is suffering. What can I do? Not much, but all I can do is what I can do and attempt to be useful to others and the people around us. Because if we freak out too, it's like everybody drowns together. We don't have a choice, you know, we just don't have a choice. But of course, we've got to find ways to deal with our own pain. And if we haven't dealt with our own suffering, then we can't be much help to others. That's why the wisdom wing always has to come first, you know, wisdom wing and the compassion wing. So it's not an easy thing, but it's possible, you know. And that's so much lately, so much, isn't it? Anyway, what do you think, people? Any thoughts? Any comments?
Thank you, Robina. I just needed the reminder.
I know, darling, it's really true. So be happy you're purifying. That's the best way. Yes, Lou.
It's an observation. I used to think that I never engaged in divisive speech, but then I realized that on my Facebook page, I share a lot of political humor.
Okay, it's always
and
negative.
Essentially, that is divisive speech.
Yeah, that's right.
Even though I'm just sharing.
Yeah, that's right. No, it's true, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's true, and it's true. It's true. No, it's very true, isn't it? That's right, exactly. And if we check that, we're going to see so often. It's very true, Lou. I think it's a good point. It's a good point. I mean, that's the point too, to talk about speech. Speech is, I mean, something I think in our culture, we have this feeling that, well, I'm allowed to say what I like. And the meaning of that is very curious. It's very fascinating. We analyze it. When we say, but I'm allowed to say what I like. If you think like that, think what it means. It implies that there's no cause and effect. It implies that what you do doesn't have an effect. Because it's like saying you've got a handful of seeds and you're saying, well, I'm allowed to plant whatever seeds I like in my garden. Well, of course you are. It's your garden, but you know that seeds bring fruits. So you'd better choose which seeds you want to plant in your garden. Yes, you are allowed to plant whatever seeds you like. Yes, you are allowed to say whatever you like. You're the boss of your life. But the Buddhist approach is everything we think and do and say produces results within ourselves. Forget the rest of the world. So there's a sense of accountability that comes when we understand that. But also that also implies, well, I'm allowed to say what I like. It also implies some kind of view, the view of punishment and reward. Don't you tell me what to do. I'm allowed to say what I like. It's sort of feeling, and that's the punishment mode, which is what the view very strongly of ego again. There's a very strong feeling that there's someone out there telling us what to do and they're squashing us with all their instructions. So we kind of like, I'm allowed to do what I like, we say. So it's kind of very, and the Buddhist approach is there's no one bossing us. There's no punisher. There's no rewarder. We are our own punisher. We are our own rewarder. And that's a pretty intense way to put it. That's pretty intense altogether. That is not how we feel. It is not what ego thinks, you know. So this really takes time to see. And it's quite shocking. I mean, as His Holiness the Dalai Lama says, karma is like self-creation, quite literally. It's the concept. So it's quite subtle, actually. But we hear it as punishment and reward. This is the problem, because that's the way ego sees things. It's kind of interesting. So it takes a while to process it. So yeah, everything we think and do and say counts. And the other thing is, I think there's something interesting, a discussion recently, and I think in an email from somebody. When we think of compassion, for example, or generosity or helping others, we think of it in terms only of the benefit to the person who gets helped. What we're not realizing, what we're not recognizing, and we think it's kind of selfish to think it even, is that that action of generosity also benefits oneself. It's one's practice. So, but we're not used to thinking that. We're thinking, you know, well, I mean, what do you mean it benefits me? That sounds selfish, but it's logical. It's your practice. If you're practicing generosity, yes, the people out there get the things, aren't they fortunate? But you are the beneficiary of that practice. And that really takes time for us to think. We think it just sort of sounds like you're doing it for that reason. Well, actually, the first level of practice is for that reason. The first level of practice of abiding by the laws of karma, the really basic level of practice starting point, it's not much about helping others yet. It's about helping yourself. And so the Buddha's view, his instructions, in his kind of like his recommendations for how to live your life, why he recommends you don't kill and don't steal and don't lie, is a really crucial point. You know, we should think it through. You know, Buddha sounds just like Jesus. Jesus says, don't kill, don't steal, don't lie, don't jump on the wrong path. It sounds the same, doesn't it? But there's a huge fundamental difference that's behind the recommendation. Jesus says it because God said. So why you're a good girl as a Christian, I'm not being critical. It's an appropriate view. If you have a view of a creator, the creator is the boss. The creator made you and made the laws. So therefore runs the show. So therefore has the power of punishment and reward. And that is exactly the view, isn't it, in Christianity and Islam? I'm not criticizing. That's not the Buddhist view. You've got to think this through. There is no punisher. There is no rewarder. We always think it's like a conspiracy theory. We always think there's someone out there running the show, you know? No, nobody's running the show. We are. But the point here is the very first level of practice. The reason Jesus says don't kill is because God said, and that's what makes it wrong. I'm quoting my Jesuit priest friend. The reason Buddha says don't kill, yes, it's because it's the same. You know, the Christian said, the priest told me, the main aspect of what makes it a sin or a wrong action is because God said, which is appropriate if there's a boss. So in other words, if your mother runs the house and you don't make your bed and mummy said to make it, it's not an intrinsically negative action, is it? It's wrong because mummy said so. And that's reasonable. But here, the Buddhist view, but the Jesuit priest said there is some aspect of natural law insofar as killing is wrong because a person doesn't like getting killed. Pretty obvious. But the Buddha also says it's only natural law. And then he recommends, but this is the point that we really find hard to think about, and we have to. We miss the point otherwise. The reason behind, at the very beginning stages of practice that Buddha exhorts us to not kill, not steal, not lie, in other words, not harm others, is because those actions will program us with those tendencies and will ripen as those experiences for ourselves, because we create our own future. So it is obvious that when you do a good action, it benefits you, and it's foolish to think otherwise. And if you do an action, a negative action, it harms you. But this is really, this is really takes its time in our culture. We don't think this, you know. It's very fascinating. I mean, if you sit there all day, let's say, writing on your Facebook, like Lou, you know, your bad things and smart all the politicians, and you're shouting and yelling at the news, and you're cursing the newspaper when you read your iPad, there's nobody in the room, nobody hears you, you're not hurting anybody, but who do you think you are harming? What kind of person do you think you are producing with all that negative thoughts and negative speech? It's sort of so obvious, but because we're so used to thinking of punishment and reward, and if no one sees me do it, I get away with it, that's how we think. Then we don't we're just very disconnected from ourselves. When we really start to realize everything we think and do and say is what produces me. Forget about the benefit to others. Forget about the harm to others. This is the point about karma at the very beginning. It really takes us time to get this. It's most fascinating. In other words, it shows how disconnected we are from each other, from ourselves. When we say, I'm allowed to be angry. Look what he did to me. It's sort of like saying, I'm allowed to stab myself. Yes, you are. But excuse me, why would you want to do such a thing? So this is the really intense point about the first level of practice, to start to realize it's like self-respect, having this sense of responsibility to whatever I do and say and think first impacts upon me. This is the fundamental starting point of practice. And when we can get this, we really will flourish. And then we will have an understanding of compassion for others who harm others, because we realize they're harming themselves. This is the main point about karma, and it's in the very first stages of practice. But we miss this. In our culture, we miss it, you know. It's very curious. So do you have any comments about that, people? Or does it make sense or not make sense? Anybody? Anyone? I don't mind. Huh? Nobody? Linda, you want to say? Good, Linda, unmute, sweetie pie. Talk to me. Good. Yes, Linda.
When you said about feeling good with things that you do,
Yes.
with what occurred in Uvidal, you know, the feeling that I had of, you know, discontent and just feeling upset.
Yes.
And trying to work that through personally.
Yes.
What I found then, that I was doing was good things, you know, and maybe it will sound foolish to one person, but it was like a random act of kindness personally, you know, and, you know, and I didn't need to tell anyone.
That's it, yes, exactly.
But it made me feel good inside.
That's
just
right.
to do it.
That's right.
You know, and that was the way I had to deal with how I was feeling personally with what was going on in the world.
There you go.
You know, and it, as you say, it doesn't mean that I'm, you know, being selfish or like I have to raise myself up.
No, that's right.
It's
exactly.
just
that's right.
Those things.
That's right. Exactly.
You know, that, you know, you do to feel good, and in turn, you know, it's like it was so like silly, but yet it really wasn't silly what I was doing.
I understand, Linda. So in other words, the point you're making, you know, and this is the Buddhist point too, very simply, that we can see that when we reach out to somebody, when we're kind, when we're patient, when we're loving, when we're generous, forget about the benefit to the other person. We can see immediately that it brings a happy feeling inside us. And that's Buddha's fundamental point. In the short term and the long term, the cause of happiness in oneself, short-term and long-term, is the development of love, compassion, kindness. And the cause of my suffering, short-term and long-term, is anger, resentment, shouting, blah, blah, blah. But it's so simple in a way, isn't it? But your point is exactly right, Linda. It's exactly right. And that benefits, I mean, that's so true. And we have to really be happy about that, not be guilty about it, you know? It's so important. Well done, Linda. Thank you very much, darling.
Thank you.
Good, sweetheart. What else, people? Any questions, please? I'd love a question.
I do, Venerable.
Yes, Victor, what have you got?
You've explained having a feeling of low esteem, you know, somebody having, can you explain that again? Because it has something to do with pride. Am I correct?
No, it's very, very interesting, isn't it? Okay, let's talk about that. Okay, let's talk about that. Okay. So the economist really, as we know, in the Buddhist view of the mind, you've got the negative, unhappy, sort of separate, miserable, tight states of mind called attachment, anger, jealousy, all these blah, blah, blah. And then we have the positive, virtuous, appropriate, spacious states of mind called kindness, love, forgiveness. We know these words, they're very, very simple, but the Buddhist distinction, the Buddhist view of the mind really goes deeply into this precise point about the distinction between the voices of ego, the unhappy ones, and the positive ones. So the point is, the irony of ego, having all these unhappy states of mind, they're naturally negative. They're naturally shrink our sense of self. There's a feeling of being separate. The more strong we have attachment, the more strong we have anger, the more strong we have the negative thoughts, the more separate and constricted and miserable we are. So if you're miserable, you're either going to be, if you got these voices of ego, and let's say you got one that's called pride, it's an overinflation of your importance. But you can see anybody who's like that, they're really fragile. They're always trying to prove themselves. They're clearly not happy. They're clearly, and put this point, they're clearly not confident. So then when that flips over, when they meet people who are better than them, that pride deflates and becomes low self-esteem. So this is the interesting point. The character of all the delusions is unhappy, constricted, separate, miserable. So you could say if there's a person who is self-confident, which is a good quality, they are very content with who they are, but they would be humble, Victor. They're not threatened by other people. And a person who's arrogant is really threatened by other people. And so then they would have low self-esteem. They'd flip over, it would revert. And I think this is the thing about the West, strongly in the West, I think pride is one of our main delusions, but it's mostly in terms of having low self-esteem. I mean, nobody would confess to having pride, but we all confess to having low self-esteem. But if we really look into it inside carefully, and we have it in the most shocking levels of it, I mean, Dalai Lama was so sad when he heard about the level of low self-esteem, self-loathing that we have in our culture. It's really related. Any of the delusions are over exaggerating this sense of a separate me. So low self-esteem is this obsessive, unhappy, absolute concrete belief that I am a creep, but it's all about I, and the same with arrogance. It's all about I. So what the virtues are all about connection and we. When virtues are more prevailing in our mind, this unhappy feeling of I kind of shrinks. And we become more open and more spacious and more confident and more kind. So but the more we understand the character of ego, which is miserable, and this is the trouble, when we have people who have got lots of low self-esteem, they don't hurt anybody else but themselves. We always we feel sorry for them. But as soon as a person has depression or we'd feel sorry for that person. But depression is internalized anger and low self-esteem is kind of flipped over pride. They're both delusions, And the proof of the Buddhist point is that these harm us. Unfortunately, when we see qualities that harm others as well, we only focus on that. So depressive people usually just harm themselves. But angry people harm others, so we get mad at them, but we feel sorry for the depressed person. We feel sorry for the low self-esteem person. But the nature of all these negative states is that they're obsessed with I. That's the key characteristic that defines them. So if we understand again, if you're self-confident, you'd be relaxed about who you are and you wouldn't be threatened and you'd be humble. You understand my point? And if you're arrogant, you know, when you meet famous people who are arrogant, they're so touchy, they're so sensitive, they get insulted easily, they're offended, you know, because they're always trying to force to show because they don't believe that they're good enough. This is the irony, you know. All the delusions are totally miserable and they're all I-based. And whether it's quiet like a little mouse or loud like a lion, they're both the same problem, you know. I mean, so, you know, when we're low self-esteem, we are obsessed with ourselves. And almost if you analyze low self-esteem, and I don't know if we can see this in ourselves, but it's kind of like resentful that other people are better than me. It's resentful. How dare they? And that's why we get low self-esteem. We see other people, oh, they're better than me. We put ourselves down. So it's not a virtue at all, you know. Humble, that's completely different. Humble is relaxed. You praise other people. You're delighted to meet people who are better than you. You learn from others because you're confident. You're easygoing. It's not ego, you know. It's very fascinating, isn't it? Do you understand, Victor?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for the explanation.
Okay, good, yes. It's an important one because low self-esteem is one of our commonest ways we talk about ourselves, you know. We think we're horrible. We put ourselves down and criticize ourselves and think other people are better than us. In other words, there's always a comparison, you know, it's always a comparison. It's very fascinating, actually. We suffer terribly from it. What else, darling people? Questions? Yeah. Anything else to talk about? People. Nothing. Judith, you look ready to ask a question. Judith Allen, are you about to ask a question, darling? Yeah, unmute, sweetheart. Okay. There you go. Well done.
I don't. What can you say about delusions in general? I really have never had much instruction about that.
You mean from the Buddhist perspective, you mean?
Yes. Yes.
I mean, if we sort of hear the Buddhist view of the mind for the first time and all these words they use, it's a bit foreign and weird to us. And when we say the word delusion in our culture, it's quite shocking. I mean, you know yourself, if someone accuses us of being delusional, we'd be very offended. In other words, we're living in la la land. We're not in touch with reality. That's what it means. But what's very fascinating, Judith, is that's one of the terms in Buddhist psychology that is used to refer to the general term called mental afflictions, negative states of mind, non-virtuous states of mind, these different terms, you know. And the Buddhist view is there's a very clear distinction in the Buddhist model of the mind between the neurotic, deluded, unhappy, miserable states of mind and the positive, optimistic, useful states of mind. And I think we know them really well, Judith. We know the word anger, depression, jealousy, upset. We know the words love, kindness, generosity, right? We know these, don't we? So well, we know them. So the Buddha's view of the mind goes into great detail about this distinction between these two. And the Buddha's view, finally, this is finally what nirvana means. When you've really done the job that he says we can do, you've completely rid your mind totally of all the neuroses, all the delusions, all the ego. So then you only have the virtues left. You are this blissful, clear, loving, compassionate person. That's Buddha's total finding. That's the basis of all Buddhist practice, learning to distinguish in our own mind between anger and attachment and, you know, jealousy and love and kindness and compassion. And the beneficiary first of this is oneself. This is the work we first do on our own mind. It's Buddha's methodology for how to become a happier person. Lessen your delusions and neuroses and grow your goodness. Speaking simply, Judith, that's the Buddhist analysis, Buddhist approach. Does it make sense what I'm saying?
Yeah, thank you.
The word delusion is very fascinating because it's not evident when we hear it. So there's the Buddhist view is there are two main characteristics of the unhappy states of mind, like attachment, anger, jealousy, low self-esteem, arrogance, you name it, you know. There's like two main characteristics. One is they're called disturbing emotions. So I think we can all prove that experientially. Check the last time you were angry. Check the last time you were anxious. check the last time you were depressed. You were definitely disturbed. Wouldn't you agree, Judith? It's miserable, isn't it?
Oh,
It's
yeah.
right there, forget about what we do to other people. It's obvious our mind is very distressed. So that's clearly one of the functions of these so-called negative states of mind. But the other one, and this is the word delusion, it's a really brilliant word because it's so accurate, because what Buddha's saying is at a deeper level, these disturbing emotions, they are rooted in being underneath the emotional component, and that's where we have to learn to practice. You're going to find that actually they are distorted sort of opinions about the world. So it's obvious if I'm really angry with somebody, I'm exaggerating. Oh, how dare you do that to me? You're the worst person in the whole world. You're the cause of all my suffering. When we're really upset, there's disturbing there, but anger is a really exaggeration of the badness of somebody or something. Attachment is an exaggeration of the deliciousness of something. So this is the delusional component. Buddha would say the more we're caught up in attachment, anger, jealousy, depression, low self-esteem, the more, one, we are distressed and suffering, but two, we are not in touch with reality. We're over exaggerating things. And this is a really fascinating point that I think if we look carefully, we can prove it's true. And that's where the word delusion comes in. It's a common word, but it's these all unhappy states of mind. And that's why, this is what we have to really start to see. We can see that if someone's really upset with you because they thought you did something, it's not true. They're exaggerating, we know this. And if you really like you're totally attached to chocolate cake, when you think of the cake, you look at the cake, you want the cake, it's completely an exaggeration of the characteristic of that cake and the expectation we have of the happiness it will bring us. That's the exaggerating of attachment. So that's the delusional component, and that we really need to look at. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Judith, does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you.
Well done. Thank you. Any questions from that, Judith, or is that the point? That was the point.
Well, no, yes. I
on,
can ask
talk.
another question that's out of this. In the sense of meditation
Yes.
as a tool
Yes.
of investigating the mind.
Yes.
Well, I where do you learn to do that? What I've been taught is concentration.
Okay, good.
But then that's it.
Oh, I see. So you mean, what's the point of it? What's the benefit, you mean?
No, what is
You mean-
there more in the meditation process that helps one looking at the mind and then going from anger to understanding it's
Oh,
an
okay, you mean, what's the
exaggeration,
process? You mean,
etc.
what's the process?
Yeah.
Is that what you're saying? Well, okay. So okay, here we all are. Let's say we're ordinary people. We've never looked into our mind. It's not part of our culture very much. We don't notice what we're feeling until it shouts out of our mouth. We know that. So the Buddha's approach is, speaking in a simplest way, they've got this technique, and these Indians, well before Buddha invented it, this brilliant, incredible, sophisticated psychological skill that enables us to get to this really subtle level of concentration. Now, most of us won't achieve that, Judith, because we've got to go off to the mountains to do that 7, 8, 10 hours a day. So most of us won't do that. But the point is this, the big advantage of beginning to get some concentration, even to do 5 minutes a day, you might not get much concentration, but you're intending to say, watch the breath, for example, and you're disciplining your mind to go back to the breath. Your mind wanders off, you go back to the breath. Your mind wanders off, you go back to the breath. So the advantage, even in the short term, of us doing a few minutes every day concentration, we might not get much concentration. But I think the real benefit is this, because we're making a conscious, intentional decision, I'm going to watch my breath for 5 minutes. In other words, we're making a decision to have some discipline over our mind. We normally let our mind run rampant, don't we? From the moment we wake up in the morning until the time we go to sleep, our mind is just running crazy. And then when it's really emotional, it vomits out the mouth. And then we wonder what happened. So we don't have any awareness of our mind. We just think this is the way I am, what to do. But all Buddha's telling us, listen, guys, you can get some control and you can learn. So you begin with some simple concentration. And even if 5 minutes of effort, then you might not get much concentration. But when you open your eyes and you go back into the world, you go back into the kitchen, there's the hubby, there's your sister, there's the traffic. Normally, you'd just be involved in the traffic and the sister and the husband, and you wouldn't be noticing your mind. But what you've developed is this skill from doing your practice that when you're washing the dishes, you're now beginning to notice what's going in your mind. You start to become conscious. And then even when we get more skillful, we start to catch the conceptual stories, the thoughts that the anger, the depression, the jealousy actually are before they become emotional. And it's at that level we can then argue with them and change them and not follow them. You get my point?
Yeah.
I mean, darling, we do this anyway. We're always working on our mind. You know, you might have a sister and she says something mean and you say to yourself, no, I won't say anything. That's a conscious decision to be kind. And that's all we're trying to learn more and more. The Buddha says we've got this incredible ability to have unbelievable control over our own thoughts and feelings and emotions rather than feeling like a victim of them. That's really the Buddha's skill, you know, at the most simple level. And we have to have confidence in that it's our thoughts, it's our mind, and we don't need to be victims of the external world. We can learn slowly to see what's going on, identify what's in there, not see it as set in stone, not define ourselves, oh, I'm a bad person, I'm angry, I'm jealous. No, just hear that's a tendency in the mind. You listen to the story that jealousy is saying, and then I use the analogy of my roommates. So I've got lots of positive roommates and lots of negative roommates. Well, you sort of learn more and more. You bring your positive roommates out and they argue with the child, the unhappy one, the jealous one, the angry one. So you're slowly learning to reconfigure your own actual thoughts. That's really what we're trying to do ever more, at an ever better way. Do you understand, Judith? Mm-hmm. That's the job. Make sense, Judith?
Yes. Thank
Good.
you.
Thank you, darling, very much. So Lou, yes.
There's a question in the chat.
Good.
Isn't this focus on the I rooted in defining ourselves through seeking approval?
Sorry, I didn't hear.
Okay. Isn't this focus on I rooted in defining ourselves through
defining ourselves
through seeking approval from external sources and using that same external world to define who we are?
Well, that's a delusion. Yeah, that's what Buddha's saying we're doing now, which is ridiculous. That's not the job we're trying to do. We're trying to stop that job. We need to define who we are. We need to know ourselves intimately and well. We need to know our good qualities and our bad qualities with a very honest mind. We need to recognize that, you know, the ego's view is that we define ourselves. I'm a bad person. I'm hopeless. I'm fat. I'm ugly. That's ridiculous. So we learn to lessen that identification. And then crucially, we also learn to have more confidence to become our own person rather than always defining ourselves in terms of how the world sees us, which is our worst attachment. So I mean, that's what we ought to be doing. That's the job we're trying to do, to lessen this attachment to other people's views, which is how the ego is now. This is the irony. So I don't know if that's clear for you, but if there's not, please ask me another question. What else, darling people? I cheated you of 20 minutes, but it's already 1 hour gone. We can have some more. Come on, talk more. Anybody else? Anything at all? Cynthia, come on.
Okay, I have a question.
Good, darling.
I was just about to ask you when you just called.
Yes.
What is exactly, for example, still in this conversation, I am not, I'm saying, I'm trying to develop my concentration, but I really watch my mind. But sometimes it's right after I already did the damage of saying
That's
something.
right. No, exactly. Of course, Cynthia, that's very common. So what's the question, darling?
My question is, when if there is any tools besides meditation and pay attention, and if there is any kind of I don't know, maybe a discipline or something you
Oh,
develop.
of course. I mean, darling, the point is this. Okay, this is where so entrenched in the Tibetan Buddhist way, it's been around for so long that it takes us a while to understand it. They talk about that. So the essential job is to do what. Hang on a minute. I've got someone. Yes. Hang on. On the Zoom, I'm shouting. I'm sorry. I'm in a hotel and they complained about me shouting. I'm so sorry. So I shout all the time, don't I? Oh my God, and I don't need to. You can hear me, can't you? I'm so embarrassed.
We like you just the way you are.
I'm in New York and it's 10 o'clock here, you see.
Everybody screams in New York.
This guy about 6'6" came and very politely said, your neighbors are complaining about your shouting. Okay, I'll talk quietly. I do shout, it's really true. I really shout all the time. It's very amazing. Anyway, what was the question now? I forget. Oh, Cynthia. Okay, darling. Listen, Cynthia. The fact is, this job of changing our mind is so intense, is so difficult, because the Buddha would say there's negative habits are so primordial. We've been doing them for countless lifetimes. So this is why in the Tibetan tradition, you hear about purification practices and practices. So they're the ones, I always use the analogy. It's like this. You see Roger Federer playing tennis and you go to Roger, please show me how to play tennis. So he sees that you're 30 pounds overweight. You don't even know how to hold a racket. And he knows you're not ready to hold the racket yet. So holding the racket and beginning to play tennis is watching your mind. That's the analogy. So you have to do lots of practices first. He says you go off in 6 months and lose 20 pounds and do lots of push-ups and go to the gym. And you'll say, Roger, you didn't hear me. Show me how to play tennis. Are you hearing my point? So all the practice of purification, of doing all your other things, which seem like religion, they purify your mind. They prime your mind at a very deep level that enable us to then do the actual job of working on the mind. That's very much the Tibetan approach. So doing your prostrations every day, doing your different practices, doing your offerings. And of course, this just seems like religion to us and we can't see the relationship. So we've got to think about that, So the actual job of being a Buddhist is working on your mind every second. That's the actual job. That's playing tennis. But you've got to be ready for it. You understand what I'm saying, Cynthia? So it's a pretty rare thing on this planet. Look at the world. I mean, most people, it's not being rude, Lama Zopa said, the vast majority of all humans on the planet have absolutely no idea that what goes on in their mind plays any role at all in their lives. Hear that point. That's pretty intense. So to even get to the point where we're sitting here discussing knowing our own mind is a pretty incredible thing. It's not common for the world. We look at the outside world and everything is the outside world. We don't even know our own thoughts. So it's pretty amazing that we're even discussing it. So Cynthia, slowly, darling. Do you understand?
Of course. Thank you so much.
I think I should stop for the poor hotel's sake. Okay. I'm sorry I was late, but the plane got late. 8 hours on the airplane and waiting in airports, and now I'm here anyway. So I'm happy to say thank you for reminding me, Mary. Very kind. So lots of love, dearest people. Food for thought. And I won't be late next time, I promise. Jangchub, Semchub, Rinpoche, Make, Panam, Keguchik, Kepa, Nyampa, Mepayan, Gongne, Gondu, Babashog. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Venerable.